This is lecture 24, part 1. And again, sorry about the name. It should be like the 12th lecture. And in this lecture, we're going to talk about very briefly about a new algorithm, recurrent neural network. It's basically just hidden Markov model plus some nonlinear activation, but it's technically they are kind of different, but you can think of it as like an upgrade to hidden Markov model. They solve the same types of problems, so they can be applied to the same problems, same examples that I talked about in the previous lecture. So first, let's talk about what we're going to do with the hidden states. So we are going to still have these hidden states, and we're going to call them, not surprisingly, hidden units, and they are related the same way. So remember, when we had a distribution of the hidden state variable, we used the notation x. We are kind of multiplying it by a linear matrix called the transition matrix, and then we get the probability distribution in the next time period. That's basically the Markov chain. So here we are doing the same. We have a bunch of weights kind of acting like the transition probabilities, and we're adding some kind of nonlinear function to it. So the important thing, the same as hidden Markov model as the Markov chain, is that the transition matrix is the same at every time point. So here we're going to have the same weights and the same activation function at every time point. So basically for each word in a sentence, if you want to imagine it that way. So the way that one word transition to another anywhere in a sentence is the same. So that's the idea behind the dynamic system, is we are going to transition the states the same way every time. And now we want to add the inputs and the output of a network. So what we can do, for example, is adding the inputs in the function. So we will have possibly two different weights, one for the input and one for the hidden states in the previous time period. And then combining these, apply some nonlinear function, we can get the hidden states for the next period. And again, we have exactly the same thing, same weight, same activation function to basically transfer from the next period to the next period and so on. But every time we are giving the network a different input, so the input in the current period. So the way we're going to handle output is a lot simpler. We're just assuming the output only depends on the current hidden state, and there should be some kind of weights as well, but it's just we use the hidden states to generate the output. So you can imagine these hidden states as kind of keeping track of the context of the sentence, and we are adding new words. These are the x value at each step, and then we are going to generate some kind of label of these words, and they only depend on the context, for example. So it's a good time for a diagram. So the hidden state number 1, it's basically the initial context, and it's given by the first word, x1, and we can represent the word by the basically one-hot encoding. For example, if the vocabulary says I am Groot, then if the first word is I, then it's 100. And so these x's are actually vectors. And these weights, I mean, these hidden states can be multiple units as well, but I'll talk about it in the next slide. In any case, and this hidden state will generate one output. And then this hidden state will also be used to generate the next hidden state. And the next hidden state is influenced by the current hidden state and the next input. And again, it generates an output. So 3 and x3, y3, and so on. So basically, it can have arbitrary length, And we're just going to use the same weights. So here, suppose we call this weight 1. I'm actually calling weight X. And these are weight W, and these are weight Y. Then we have the same set of weights. We replicate these weights for each word in a sentence. And so the network is basically the same for all time periods. We're just using different inputs, and we keep track of different hidden states. So that's the basic idea behind a recurrent neural network. And one thing I want to say here is that the notation is kind of inconsistent with HMM, so it's my mistake. I'm sorry, I should have used different notations for HMM, but here it seems Y and X are flipped. So let's talk about some examples that I've given in HMM lecture. So the X here, for example, they can be the sound. So suppose we are doing voice recognition, or yes, and these are the sounds and these are the words. So remember, we used X as the hidden states as the words and sound as Y, so now it's kind of flipped. And also, if we want to recognize handwritten digits, then these X are the positions. So for example, XY position as a time series. So XY, something like that. And then we are generating a label, positions of the pen, and we're generating a label, which is basically the character, handwritten character that we are writing. And also, I think we had the example of part of speech tagging. So the X will be a word, actually will be something like a vector like this, and then the output is the part of speech of that word. Or we can do something like sentiment analysis. So each word could correspond to like whether it's a positive or negative word, or whether the comment is a positive or negative comment, I mean offensive or non-offensive comment, and so on. And these are called sentiment analysis. And these can be Y, and the words can be X. So basically, it's kind of flipped compared to what we did in HMM. And of course, there are other structures. So for example, we don't have a sentiment for each word. Each word each word does not need to be happy or unhappy. We can have a whole sentence being happy or unhappy. Then we could have something like we don't have all of these, and only at the end of the sentence we have output Y or something like that. So the network structure is variable to handle different kinds of problems, but the main idea behind it is the same. And there is one special thing that I want to talk about, how to generate new sentences. Then what we can have, for example, is these X's are the words in a sentence, and these Y's are the next word in a sentence. So for example, X1, X2, X3 are I am Groot. We can train a network that put this M here and Groot here, and so on. And then when we activate the network, we can basically try to generate the next word, and this network basically learns the relationship between the current word and the next word. So that's how we are going to use it as kind of a replacement of the Markov chain model that we discussed in the previous lecture. And I also missed machine translation. So for example, X can be the words in one language and Y can be words in another language. We can have a model like this as well. So here language 1, and here words in language 2. So basically it has similar applications compared to HMM. It's just it's structured differently, and we're going to have these non-linear relationship between these variables. So here you probably want to see the standard fully connected neural network kind of diagram for recurrent neural network. Personally, I don't really like it, but I want to show you here. as well. So you have these input units. And for example, again, the I am Groot example, then suppose we get an I, then it's 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, or you get a M is 0, 1, 0, or 0, 0, 1. So these are basically inputs of each word. And then suppose we have two hidden units. So let's call it Z1 and Z2. And they are connected with H1, which we usually call A1 actually, and A2. So these are the hidden units. As I said, there can be more than one hidden unit. And then how we are going to connect them is the same as before, like this. So there are weights, and you just do the dot product between x and the weights to get our Z1 here. And there is a nonlinear activation function in between. Usually it's the hyperbolic tangent one. And what we have is still the outputs. So output will have the z's as well. Z1, say let's suppose the output is the same length as the inputs. Then we can have something like this. So they are related by another set of weights, and then they are activated as well. A1, A2, A3, and possibly here the G can be, say, softmax. And at the end, each one of these A can be used to compute a cost, or, well, it doesn't really matter. We can just combine them and subtract by the actual label Y, and we get a cost. So that's basically the structure of a regular neural network. The recurrent part comes from the fact that these z's are not only connected to x, they are also connected to a. So we can basically go back, and we can go back that way as well. So there will be a set of weights between the hidden units for the current word and the next word. Basically, we keep track of this, and we feed in different words into the network. And in the next one, there is a link. There is a link that's kind of weights between the previous hidden units and the next hidden unit for the next word. So basically, it's recurrent and it's connected that way. But personally, I still like this kind of representation more, and we're just treating the hidden units at different time periods as different hidden units instead of saying that they are the same. And we are just passing different inputs into the same network. Okay, so here are those complicated notations now. So as I said, the hidden units, they are functions, kind of a linear combination between one set of weights and x and another set of weights and the previous activation, so the previous hidden units plus a bias term, and they are usually activated by hyperbolic tangent activation function. And the output part is actually exactly the same as before. We just have the dot product between the weights and the activations, and we use something like a softmax. So here we are going to use the same softmax activation. So we are going to use the same cross entropy loss, and the loss at time t is basically the loss for a particular word in a sentence, and we need to sum them up for all the words in a sentence. So after we process one document, then we need to sum up the cost over each individual words passing through this network. So the notation is kind of very complex, and so I listed all of these here. So the problem is, for each instance, it's basically like each document, either it's a sentence or a whole document, and each feature is like the one-hot encoding of whether it's the first word in the vocabulary in the dictionary or the second word or the third word. So we have xij, and t is basically the position of the word in a sentence. So the x is represented by this, can be stored in this kind of three-dimensional array, and the first two dimensions are like what we had before, but there is another dimension that's in the same instance, in the same sentence or same document, we have multiple words in sequence, and we're going to subscript it by t. So for exactly the same reason, we have yijt as well. And all of these activations and linear parts, they have subscript ijt as well, because we can have multiple units in the hidden layer. So these j's are basically the units, and the output is the same. It's multiple units in that layer. And the weights are actually very similar. We have multiple units in the input and multiple units in the outputs, and it's the same over time. So the important part here is they don't have subscript t, because they are the same, because we are assuming the kind of the Markov chain dynamic system structure. So they are independent of t. We are just using the same weights over time, and that's why the weights are actually exactly the same as a standard fully connected neural network. And the only difference is we have these weights that's between hidden unit j and hidden unit j. Hidden units j prime and j at different times. So these are basically the connections between hidden units for different words in a sentence. Consecutive words in a sentence. Okay, so this is the end of this part. In the next part, I will briefly talk about how to train these neural networks.